Welcome to a new episode of the Astro Podcast. Today we have with us researcher Vanessa Portugal, who is an associate researcher from the Autonomous National University of Mexico. And she is joining us to talk a little bit about the expressions of astrology in South America, which are part of her research into art history and images. Welcome.
Thank you. It's very nice to meet you.
So can you share with us a little bit about your research lines and what you're currently pursuing at this point?
Oh, yes. From art history, I have mainly researched astrological images in diverse contexts in Italy and mostly Mexico, which is New Spain, and during the 17th and 18th century. Mostly I have worked with manuscripts that have survived and because of inquisitorial trials, and of course some paintings and galleries, and at the moment I am working towards a project on astrological galleries within religious context. So that's pretty much what I have done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Vanessa, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you here because we have been together at the Warburg and we have been talking about astrology and images and all these concepts for a long time, and now I have the opportunity to formally interview you. So it is a pleasure. And one of the things that we have talked before, and I would like to ask you now, is what exists, what is it in form of documents exist in Mexico, where you research, and in general terms in South America, related to astrology. And my point is not only because the documents have to be either imported from the old continent or created there, and also because there was the Inquisition, and apparently it was quite strong there, maybe not to astrology, but for other issues. So what is it that we can find when researching in Mexico related to astrology?
Well, as most of us know, exactly the importance of astrology for the nautical exploration and the cartography of the newfound land that kept happening was very important. So of course it is, there are many cosmography works, and there are some publications from 16th century like De Sfera Liber Unus by Dominic Friar Francisco Marolico. Other is a Physica Speculatio by the Augustinian Friar Alonso de la Veracruz in 1557. But mostly are nautical instructions, which were published even by even by this one in Spanish is Instrucción Náutica para el buen uso y regimiento de las naos by Diego García de Palacio, who became rector of the University of Mexico. So besides that, we have lots of almanacs, religious calendars, that kept being printed every year, of course, putting a stress in the lunar calendars. But I think we might be certain that some publications, maybe even like manuscripts, as we were saying, were made. Maybe we yet need to find some, but that taught people to do their own astrological accounts. And in this sense, what we have, and I would like to share with you, is this 18th publication by Antonio Gamboa, which was the chair of mathematics at the Universidad of Mexico, which simplifies the method proposed by the astronomer Christopher Clavius in the 16th century. Yeah. But he even says that this is simplified and you can count with your fingers. So, and so let me show you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so here it is.
Okay.
Well, he says to each finger and to each bone it corresponds a month and a day, and so you would have to add, and it explains how you can go from using your same hand to say which when will the religious festivities will take place.
Mm-hmm.
So, but before that, it is precisely the inquisitorial archives that have most of the documents. And as you were saying, in a way, it limited the open practice of astrology, but on the other side, preserved some of the astrological. So we have in this one an example. Let me show you. Which you might recognize.
Yes.
So this is part of inquisitorial trial from early 17th century. That from a Mercedarian convent, a guy saying that there is a lot of astrology going on there. and he actually gives the inquisitorial authorities this piece of proof.
This is proof. They are all astrologers, closeted astrologers, and here's the proof.
Yes, exactly. And I think Elena, you saw this paper, and
yes.
There was something wrong with it.
Well, it is kind of more like about if I remember correctly, it's more about the lunations or the ingresses of the sun. So it's not so much about a personal horoscope, if I remember it correctly, and it's more about the phases of the moon or the ingress of the moon in a sign or the ingress of a sun, something like that. Let me see, because let me see. Where's the sun? The sun is 14 degrees of Taurus, and the moon is 16 degrees of Scorpio. So it's a bit after the full moon, and it is Nativitas. Oh, this one is Nativitas. Yes. Now this one is Nativitas. It's not the one I remember. It's another one. Nativitas, and then
it seems that it was something wrong with the numbers that were given because of.
I think I remember. I saw another one
with the latitude of Mexico. Of course, there were still, these issues to properly locate Mexico City and for them to do this.
Well, that would certainly be a problem because they were working with the southern hemisphere and different ways of working with things, especially when we go further south. That would be a problem. Yeah, that would be a problem. Not here, but this is something that they discuss in America, especially in Brazil and other countries that are further south. How does this work in another hemisphere? So I don't know. Probably has some latitude problems here. Mexico City.
It's not so bad. Mexico, I was just checking. Mexico has a latitude of 19.43 north. So here is pointing 20, which is a normal round up.
Yeah.
So it's not badly calculated.
And this doesn't even raises the problem of the south and.
Here we don't have a southern hemisphere problem. We would have to recalculate the chart to see if it's correct. It's correct in terms of planetary positions, but it seems to be okay.
One of the things that we can see from these charts is you can guess or deduce is the tables that they are using. Normally we use, and also the house system that they are using.
Yes, here he's giving a lot of importance to the lunar positions. He's calculating latitude of the moon, declination of the moon. And a lot of lunar data here. So it is possible, I'm not sure, I would have to see more, but it has been torn apart.
Yeah.
But probably I would suspect, I would have to see this better, but I would suspect he was prepared to do some kind of direction. So he was going to attempt to move the moon to specific dates in which he would be calculating events of his life or health things, something like that. Quite interesting. And
sorry, the one I saw before was not a nativity. It was more like something about the lunations or something. This one is sorry.
yes. And what is the story behind this particular one, Vanessa?
Well, the story is that Quan Menendez was accused of teaching astrology within the mercenary convent, and of course saying what will be the outcome of the quarrels, political quarrels among the higher religious figures, and basically they just wanted him to stop. And as I said, he would pick up this little piece as a proof, but it was said that he would, if he was asked something, he would just take a paper and will do it. Of course, I don't think it will be like, okay, let's do that. But apparently, like, this piece of paper is, as you say, is not too big, and on the back side you can see loads of math being done. So yeah, we don't have the further pages of the of the folio of the file, but we can imagine that it was just dismissed as many others that were, because they would say, oh, somebody came and gave in this astrologer, but okay. Yeah.
What you're saying, this is actually a nativity, but what you're saying is that this person was accused of practicing also what we now call horary astrology, and by that time it would be called interrogations or questions. Someone asks a question to the astrologer, and the astrologer would calculate the chart for the moment of the question, and then the chart would give the answer. Like, for instance, someone stole my horse. Where's my horse? Or who stole my horse? And then they would calculate.
Yeah, here in this one, if I'm reading correctly, and I'm just saying it properly now, he's trying to calculate something for an age of 17 years old. So whoever is the owner of this chart is trying to calculate the planetary positions, I think, of the moon for the age of 17 years old, which probably is the time where he's analyzing the person's horoscope. And this could be by a number of reasons, any personal things, or it can be a matter of an illness or something that's going wrong in the person's life. So he's trying to figure out where the moon is. And we don't know if in the missing parts of the paper, if he wouldn't be calculating other positions for that age. So I think this is something
it
like
could be a clue of something, because if we manage to see, and this is possible, it can be done, where the person was born, and it was the 4th of May.
Yeah, we have the data.
And
we have
the
the
date
complete
is
data,
there with the time and everything. So we can add the 17 years, and maybe it will give us a clue about who it is, or what is happening, or if it is some special date. So yeah, this is I loved these things, as you know, because it is also always very interesting. So what we have for now found out is that we have nativities like this one. We have more like lunations or mundane horoscopes, like for collective charts, and also interrogations or horary charts.
So we have an active practice of astrology within the religious orders, which is not at all so unsurprising. We were expecting. They were the ones that were learned in this mathematics and applied mathematics.
And apparently, from what you said before, our conversations before, this was it was repressed somehow. It was not it was not good, but they were not paying much attention to it, because by then they thought astrology was no longer working. It was more like entertainment. At least this was what I understood from your words.
Yeah. Basically, when you read all the examinations on astrology, this is what you take from, like, oh, this is like just to to entertain people. But the matter of accuracy is still on the core of the band to astrology. And as we were saying, we also have some confessions, and for example, this trial that I was telling you about, made in Manila in 1617, for which a lot of astrologers came forward with self-confessions, I guess just before they were told. But this is quite funny, this trial, because we start with one guy, like Alonso Flores, who says he knows astrology and that he has made 20 charts and answered to diverse questions that he's been asked, and he doesn't remember what about, and he doesn't remember either their accuracy. But he also takes the opportunity to give away Hernando de los Ríos and Juan Segura, other astrologers. And then there is also Miguel Garceta, who is a clergyman, who also names Hernando de los Ríos and Alonso Flores. It's just so funny because they are giving each other's names, yes. And Juan de Segura for practicing divinatory astrology. And he also added that one particular guy, Alonso Flores, said that the Inquisition couldn't ban the use of mathematics, for they are basic to the computing of the movement of the celestial objects, and with them, their relationship with life on Earth. So it's like, you cannot forbid science.
That's a very good argument, actually. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, and then later he has to go to confession, this Juan de Segura, and he says that yes, he have made charts related to nativities and other matters based on the rules of science, and that he understands that all of them are natural rules, so they don't have an intervention or pact with the demon, and he didn't attribute certainty to all the answers that he gave, because they say that they are based on natural rules, but also on conjectures and the effects that are derived from them. So sometimes they can fail, but he adds that he has always delivered something like certain judgments, like the ones that were in the battles of Philippines, and he mentioned some that that took place, that he was not just
not just saying things. Yeah, he says, well, things can fail, but I have never failed. Really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because that's basically the argument that they're going to use after the publication of the prohibitions by the church, after the issue of the bull of 1585, if I'm not 85 or 86. I never know this date by heart. That is the defense, which is they're doing an astrology which is based on natural rules. So it's what we could call today scientific. Yeah. So it doesn't go against religion, and it's not included. It cannot be included in the divinatory and superstitious practices that the church highly condemns at this time. So they always have this. Of course, they always use their time to tell them that yes, it's true, but we do make correct predictions and correct assessments, even just following natural rules. We can do predictions, and they actually do occur, and we can practice it.
It is interesting, and it is an interesting departure from the medieval period. I'm a medievalist, and in medieval times, what they did, in Christian context, in medieval times and in Christian context, the main worry was if astrology was licit or illicit, if astrology was something that was okay with religion or not. Mm-hmm. So in this time, so they never questioned its efficacy. It worked, but we cannot do it because it's against religion. And then they would argue, no, it's okay for the reasons that you just said and everything. But when we come to this period, 17th, 18th century, there's another argument. It's like that doesn't work. Some people say it doesn't work, and they simply dismiss it, not because it's against religion, but because it doesn't work. So there's a completely different mindset that is coming into play here. So they had to work with two different kinds of criticism. This is not good for religion, and this doesn't work. So it could be either one or the other. I don't know how they managed to argue against the two, because they somehow can cancel each other. Because if it doesn't work, you don't have to worry about religion, and if it is against religion, it means that it works. So it's kind of, I don't know. It was a very confusing.
It is a complex discussion, because what happens is when you do have those kinds of arguments, is religious licitude. Is it permissible for a Christian to practice this kind of foretelling of the future, of assessment of the future? And then it's also a question of,
does it work?
What does work in astrology? To what extent does it work? What technical aspects of astrology are licit, valid in terms of natural law and can work? Others which are completely illogical and cannot work by natural law. And this creates, and I'm oversimplifying here, of course, but this creates a discussion and a cleavage and the structuring within astrological practice.
Erodes the very basis of astrology.
And the part of, because then there are parts which are considered illogical and not rational, but which are in the core practice of astrology. So it's going to be difficult to simply put them off and be able to do astrology. And then the topic that you were talking about, Lana, is that as we progress from the 17th century onwards, the argument that astrology doesn't really work, so we cannot really predict things from the movement of the stars in the manner that the astrologers have claimed until here, becomes increasingly powerful. And then I think what we observe is a drop in the religious argument. It gets less important. It's always there, and it's still here today, but it gets less important, and the importance becomes if it's not something that is possible to do, it's not scientific. And then we have astrology finally, with the 18th century coming out of the scientific corpus of knowledge.
This is our experience here in this side of the ocean. I don't know your experience in your side of the ocean, although you're in London at this point.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely that. It's very interesting to see, as you said, that the way that astrology has, the history of astrology, how it reached to the pseudoscience that it is today for many. But as you were saying, precisely in this point, and at least in the strangely strong inquisitorial force, these astrologers were really clever as to address both of the problems, because, for example, this Segura finishes saying that what I was mentioning before, that astrology resides in science, yet the conjectures are fallible, but if he didn't do anything to offend God or true philosophy, but if there was something bad in it, he will tell his superiors. so they take out everything from astrology that could, harm the devotee. So it's like also playing a political game here, like, oh, it's not me, but
I think probably the astrologers, even the ones who are not professional, like religious people who were interested, I think they more or less were instructed or self-instructed in how to reply to these criticisms. How should I address these criticisms and reply to them, because they more or less use the same arguments, and they are clever arguments, and so they use them more or less consistently.
Yeah, it's consistent there. In one way, they're maybe phrased differently, but I think that the apologetic, the defenses of astrology
It's
more or less follows always this kind of lineage. And here he synthesizes that very well. He's doing something which is scientific and natural, and he's not going against God by doing things which are not natural and thus not permissible at all by someone who's Christian. And I think that's basically the argument then that they will all, one more flourish and more developed than others, will claim and to defend themselves from accusations.
And when it comes to the effectiveness of astrology, they say, yes, this is conjecture, yes, it can fail, but not with me. So it's kind of interesting to see how they address this.
What is also very interesting, and probably you will find this more in the Inquisition of books. So when they're doing all the revision of the books and saying and the expurging of books. So what do they prohibit and what they allow? And this is also quite interesting. I recently published a paper, we all did, in a number regarding the Inquisition and astrology here in the Iberian Peninsula and in Iberian context. It's very interesting to see.
Is it open access?
No,
it isn't.
But I can put a link to that later on. But it's interesting to see what part or technical aspects of astrology they think it's completely unacceptable and which parts are okay. And sometimes there is this gray area where they say, well, you can read this, you don't need to scratch it off, but be careful because not everything is according to free will. That doesn't respect the premise of free will. So you can read it, but you have to be careful about it because it's an old book or it's something older and it might not respect the church's sayers on this, which is quite interesting, and the way they select and do these kinds of analysis of the content. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. In what I have found in New Spain, for example, regarding the book, are two things on forbidden books. One is the major case of Melchor Pedesta Sotos' library, who he was the master builder of Mexico City Cathedral, yet he managed to get a library of around 1,700 something books, and they say 1,870 volumes, I guess, is titles and volumes in varied subjects from mathematics, architecture, Roman antiquities, Renaissance art and literature, yada yada. But also what's important for us is astrology, and of course there's a large volume of books, and so they were all taken in, and they will be delivered by stages. Okay, here these 400 books are okay, these 200 are okay, something like that. All this time the poor man was lying in the dungeon. He was losing his mind. Eventually he was given another prisoner to be there, and bad luck, he got stabbed and he died there. And all the books that he had were given to a bookseller. But we do have an account of the astrology books that he had, and some of them that were forbidden, and of course some of them were Kepler's. But we find some of that he had. Of course, it's difficult now to trace which ones. It will be interesting to see if he had some notes or something in these manuscripts or something, because he actually learned astrology from an Augustine friar. But if I may mention some of them, were the Varior de Ocaso Astrorum from Autolycus, the Magnitudinibus Edistantis Solis et Luna de Aristarchus, In Re Judiciali by Abraham ben Ezra, Flores Astrologiae by Albumazar, In Judicis Astrorum de Albohacens, and also from Astronomicae Tabulae from Alfonso el Sabio, and the Sacroboscos Sfera. All these
So he has both the basics and the more advanced, and also the means to calculate. So he was like a complete set.
Complete set.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's funny because in his trial he says, "Oh, I don't know Latin." So some books were translated into Spanish and some books into I don't know, so it couldn't have been me.
That's
Like
very interesting. Okay, in which they are translating works, because you already have people interested in these works, but who don't have enough knowledge of Latin or knowledge of Latin at all, so they can't read it, and they ask for that translation. And I saw similar evidences of here in Portugal of the same thing happening, where you sometimes find manuscripts which have entire chapters of books translated into Portuguese or partial. So notes, for example, Juntinos on conjunctions, and then you have the Portuguese. The chapter is, or the highlights of the chapter are translated into Portuguese, which means that the person who wanted that translated didn't know Latin or didn't know enough Latin to read the original, and we find this progressively appearing mid 17th century. It gets more common, which is also curious.
Which is probably the period you are researching at this point, 17th and 18th century.
Yeah, his trial was in 1655, and actually not knowing Latin was what gave him away, because he would hire not any Latinist, but they would come and do the translations, and there was this last one who said, "Oh, I spoke some forbidden books here." And
so not knowing Latin was what really.
Yes.
The translator denounced him as someone who had forbidden books. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very difficult time.
Yeah, difficult.
And people would denounce each other.
Yes,
that was very
and it's complicated because here in Portugal, and this is perhaps. We don't have that many, at least we haven't found yet that many accounts of process, the tribunal process of the Inquisition, where astrology is at the core. There are a few, but not many. Usually the main issue that pops up is Judaic practices. So people who are newly converted and still keep Judaic practices. And this is the Inquisition's obsession here in the Iberian Peninsula for a number of centuries.
Yeah, it's Judaism.
It's obsessive. It's obsessive, and it's almost all about that. Astrology doesn't come up so much, but they do make some assessments of almanacs, and occasionally one or two practitioners are called in.
Also because they tend to associate a little bit Judaism and astrology, vaguely. Like they could have some document, and so it would contribute for the suspicion of Judaism.
Yeah, but
and by Judaism, I mean they were converted by force, some 2 or 3 generations before, and they kept their cultural practice and religious practices, of course, but secretly. So when this was discovered, when this was found out, they could be killed. They could be killed. So this was more the context here.
Yes. And it's not so much astrological, although it comes up. And I think of the 1 or 2 trials that I'm aware of, the consequences were never extreme for the person. They were just admonished and probably spend a couple of days or weeks in prison, or have to pay some kind of fine. It's not usually something severe, like in this case where he died in prison, waiting for them to reach a certain decision, which is terrible.
I don't know if you know this, but it would be interesting to see if the penalties were more, if the punishment was more severe in the New World. For astrology, I mean, or we had to compare it.
Yeah, it would be very interesting because, as you were saying, here was also more like a control of the society, and most of the inquisitorial charges, at least during 17th century, were against Protestants. You know, somebody who is blasphemous against God, and there will be loads of paperwork against witchery and sorcery and all these things, but there will be like there's a whole community doing it, but it's okay, like they're just ignorant, or So for astrology, it will be, because I think also many religious people, they would say no, it's fine. Like there is one case which actually kept people going. So there was this guy who found a manuscript that was given the name Astrological manuscript, and he took it to the local cathedral, and it was sent later to Mexico City, and then later to the Inquisitorial, to see if it was okay to have this. Let me show it to you. It's very interesting because it is actually a manual of geomancy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sometimes geomancy came together in the books, together with astrology. It's really interesting. Yeah, this is geomancy, right? Yeah.
And here we don't have the same problem as before, that it's in because it's not in Latin. This is in Spanish, but really it's a large document, about around 20 pages, I can say, and it starts with an introduction that explains theoretically the origin and explains how it works, geomancy, and then it explains how to do it, and also how to interpret it, and it even gives you examples how to say it, and of course it includes these charts. So what happened here is that it said, like, there is a astrologer who came recently to town, and he gave me this document, and I'm interested to see if it's okay to have it or not, so I sent it to you. And they said, no, the book is forbidden. but they don't even follow the astrologer who gave the book, or they don't even say the name of this person who gave the notebook.
So they said it's forbidden, but they were not terribly worried about it. Just don't look at it, and that's it. And
forbidden, and they kept it, but
and we're seeing it here,
and it's
still in existence, in quite a good state.
Well, there was always a very ambiguous relation between the church and astrology, because some of the popes, and I'm in the Middle Ages, some of the popes were acknowledged with astrology. Some of them were not, but they had counselors, astrologers. It is kind of a very, very long and strange relation, sometimes toxic.
And then that goes on.
And it goes on
until the 16th century and 17th century. It still goes on, that kind of awkwardness between the practice and the practice of astrology by learned men, and then the prohibitions that the church imposed on such practices. And we were discussing this earlier in other podcasts, where we were discussing the researchers who have their focus on non-Christian cultures, the practice of astrology in non-Christian cultures, where this kind of problem doesn't exist. So this ambiguous relationship between Christianity and astrology, which begins in late antiquity and goes on throughout the Middle Ages until the early modern period, and molds a lot of the way astrology is practiced and seen in the West, it's quite unique to this cultural context. In other cultural contexts where you don't have the free will dynamics and the theology is completely different, there aren't these kinds of problems. If there are problems, it's another type of
there
dynamics.
are other types of problems, but for instance, they don't have to be constantly defending astrology and asserting astrology's licitude and respect for religion. So they don't have this. They have other concerns. For instance, Ptolemy, who is a polytheist living in the 2nd century, is worried about astrology's utility. It's a completely different mindset, but not about if it is permissible or not. It's not even a question. So
it is interesting. What I was saying is the result and how this interaction between the church and astrology molds the practice of astrology itself. And when we get to these centuries that we're looking at, this is constantly weighing on anyone who wants to study or practice astrology, because they have to be very careful not to upset the religious tribunals and the Inquisition at this point. The Inquisition is the stronghold of legislation.
By then, astrology turned out to be a high-risk profession. You could die. You could be killed. I mean,
you could therefore offend somebody, or also not to be accurate or be accurate. Yeah, anything could be. And what you were saying about the problematic crazy relationship between religion and astrology is that thing that we saw, one phenomenon of Christianizing the horoscope. Would be so funny to say. I am not Virgos. I am what would be like Mary's sign. Or
yes. Could you talk about, as also someone who studies and researches the history of art? Could you talk a little bit about this, because this is fascinating. Yes. It was never mainstream, but it's a completely fascinating idea.
This idea of Christianizing heaven, which appears a lot in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, it's. I think in Mexico, one of the main images of that is Virgin Mary of Guadalupe. There are some accounts that started with Francisco de Florencia's, the Jesuit friar, proposition of Zodiaco Mariano. It's important to say that Florencia was also examiner at the inquisitorial trials, of course. So he knew about astrology, but basically it's sort of taking this idea of influence of higher spheres over certain territories. So it will be at least the representations will be at least saying, okay, so we have Mary of Guadalupe protecting Mexico City, so we do a map and her reach right on the protection, and then we do another which is Virgin Mary of remedies, and she's protecting another side, but they are all located within celestial map as well. So
there's a correspondence.
Yes, so some scholars have understood like Astra, as the influence for Virgin Mary. And I think that is my fascination with these astrological galleries, because there is one in Augustinian convent in Morelia in Mexico, where you have some sort of horoscope at the middle of the ceiling, and on the sides you have the life of Saint Augustine. So it would be interesting to see how they both relate, because of course this is a story of fulfillment, right? You want to see the end and everything going towards the city of God, and this relation between the formation of a city of God in the Americas, where everything can be peaceful and everybody will be religious, Catholic, in contrast to the Protestants that were in Europe, and reaching to this ideal society is presented in diverse allegorical images. So.
That would be very interesting to see how they correspond and what they represent in detail. That would be really, really.
Yes, and how they sort of coordinate the harmony of heavens, which is always a concept that has been present, even with no astrological issues associated with the celestial harmony of heavens, and then the harmony on earth. So that it's probably we'll be finding a lot of connections there.
Could this be somehow related with some kind of foundation horoscope? I I'm asking this because in Europe and the Middle East, some of the cities, not all of them, but some of the cities we know for sure that they were founded or refounded at a certain moment, at a certain astrological moment. So there are charts of the cities, and therefore they associate the city with some sign or planet or something, some astrological associations. Maybe because it's a new world, and maybe they were like founding cities at specific astrological moments. Probably there are no evidence of that, but it is a possibility.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see that. So far, I haven't found the account. As you say, it will be difficult to find the evidence, mostly the evidence.
There is one chronicle, which I have to recall the exact name, which does speak about the foundation of Lima in Peru. And he gives some astrological correspondence as to the ascendant of the city, the placement of the moon. I remember one that's very interesting, because he says, because the city has the moon in Virgo, it is a city which is highly populated by nuns. So he makes this association. And this is in the chronicle. I think it's the chronicle of the Augustinians in Peru.
Yeah, it's from Ledesma, I think.
I think so. I don't have the name, but I can pass on that information to you later on.
It is interesting to see, because they were in the completely new continent, new world, and they might have been interested in making it right, as you were saying, the idea.
Yeah, now we know. So
this information about the astrological qualities, and there are some papers already written about this. The astrological qualities of the New World is quite important, even for something as basic as the practice of medicine, which is based on the way that the land influences health at a certain point. And most of that assessment comes also from an astrological perspective. So a given sign associated to a given land will produce a certain humor or a certain relationship with the people that must be understood in order to properly understand the diseases and the health issues occurring in a region. So that's quite an interesting point. So they would have a completely unexplored terrain when we're talking about the New World, because there are absolutely no classical references that can support their assessment. So it's completely new science in this regard.
That's true. In regard to the qualities, astrological qualities given to, for example, the food, the produce. I found some examples. Again, in South America, in Virreinato de la Nueva Granada, which is today Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
But again, like now in Colombia, saying that the roots are lighter, higher. It's easy to digest. It's easy to eat, and something like that. Yeah.
I think in the 16th century, they, and by they I mean Europeans, several Europeans like Portuguese, Spanish, others, they sent physicians to the New World to taste and qualify new foods, like pineapple. And they would qualify them by hot, cold, moist, or dry. And then they would try the basic galenic qualities, which are also associated to the elements, the 4 classical elements. And then they would try to determine, to see if they were good for medical purposes. For instance, they say that pineapple is very good. It's very good, and it is actually. It's delicious. But they say it's very good because it's hot, therefore it will help digestion.
Yes.
Something like that.
And it was good for kidney stones.
Kidney stones, yeah.
Which was an affliction that the Europeans had. And I think that one of the reports is that they eat these new fruits and they eat pineapple, and it helps them with their kidney stones. And they're marveled because they found almost a miraculous cure or a problem that they would be suffering. And so you have these reports of people settling in I think it's, in this case, it's Brazil. I'm not sure. And writing these reports and say, this is wonderful. This is wonderful because people who are suffering from this ailment are much, much better. And it's so interesting. And then they would correlate this with astrological associations, quality associations, so that they would fit into the medicine, the canon of medicine, which is quite interesting. Yeah.
So when it comes to images and the part of art history, I'm always curious about this because it's spectacular, it's beautiful. Is there any difference in the representation, for instance, of the zodiac, apart from the Zodiaco Mariano that you mentioned? Or is there the typical?
Yeah, no, it's a typical, like we well, in Mexico we did have of course astrological knowledge from the Mayas, which didn't go mainstream. They did take some of the Western astrological knowledge and sort of adequated it to what they were doing, but they have their own format.
Their own system. They have their own system. But you say the Mayas were somehow adopting parts of the Western European astrological concepts?
Yeah, I think it happened at some point within the education, because they saw that some things were similar, and there is an ongoing debate about the circularity of their time, because it's very easy to think that, you know, they thought like circular, but they say that circularity actually came from within the Western tradition, that they were looking more into the spiral. So they're adjusting their system that could have been maybe even a square to a format of a circle eventually, was a result of that. But no, what happened, yes, afterwards was in probably 18th and maybe even 19th century, was the discovery of new constellations in the southern hemisphere. So some astrologer from South America will see some constellation, I would name it, I will draw it, but then it would have to go to a consensus, and then it wouldn't be at the end like that. So sometimes it's difficult to see, oh, which one is he talking about? Then you have to see what, you know, the location to say, oh, then it's this one. So it happened to that. But for example, what also there are not many astrological images in at least in Mexico. The others, what happens is that they are allegorical, of course, used for political power. Of course, they are relating the sun to the king and how everyone else moves around. But this is, let me show you now one that is a bit of what I was talking about. Do you see? It says ceiling.
Yes.
So there are no planets that I can see. It's just the zodiac and the sun. So I guess it relates more to that idea of...
It's the ingresses. It's the ingresses of the sun, because the four suns, one is in one is in Aries, one is in Capricorn, one is in Libra, and the other one, and also the zodiac is reversed. Normally the zodiac goes around in counterclockwise.
Yeah, and this shall I say this?
This is very common.
This eccentric way of representing the circle of the sun, it's the same thing that you would find in an astrolabe. So it is telling us of the different timing of the seasons, which is quite interesting.
This is interesting because there are stars all around except here. That there's something that I cannot see. Yeah. This is quite interesting. And one of the things I always look at the zodiacs is the representations of Cancer and Scorpio, because sometimes people don't know exactly how does the Scorpio look, or how does the crab look. So they just made up something.
Yeah, it is more common in the Middle Ages than at
Yeah,
this
it's
point.
more
At this
common in
point,
the
there's
Middle
already a
Ages,
standard
yeah.
books of representation.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
you
But
don't find
sometimes
it so
even
much. Yeah.
the crab is like a lobster. Here is a proper crab, not a lobster. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this would be the ingress of the sun in the different seasons of the year. So spring for Aries, and then summer Cancer, and then it would be Libra for autumn, and then Capricorn for winter. But the zodiac is reversed, so which sometimes happens when they represent it like this. And also what you just said is the how do you call it,
I'm trying to
not the
recall
equator.
it's the to display how there's an eccentricity. It's an eccentric, so the sun is not at the center of the circle of the zodiac, so that it can represent the different duration of each season.
Because each season is slightly different from the others.
So they're not equal in duration. Yeah. It's quite interesting. So what you have here is at the same point an astrological representation, because you do have the signs of the zodiac, but you also have an astronomical representation of the seasons and of the cycle of the year. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
And quite nicely made, I must say, because the depictions are not bad. Quite nice. Yeah.
Yes, very nice. Where is it again, please?
It's a Saint Augustinian convent in Morelia, in Mexico.
Oh, and you see, in a convent, and then we have a zodiac. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the old sacristy that was in use until the 18th century. Then they renovated it, but that was a place where the priest would go before mass, and
to inspire himself.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
and it's a natural cycle, so it's astrological at one point, but it's also calendrical in the sense that it's the natural cycle of existence. So it doesn't have such an heavy astrological connotation.
Because there's this interface between astrology and the calendars, so they can always excuse themselves saying it's just
it's a calendar. Yes.
Look at the sky; it's there.
Exactly. It's there. It's a natural phenomenon. So no harm done here. No offense to any kind of religion or God.
Do you just before we finish our conversation, do you have any more present plans of researching this topic, or are you now addressing other topics for research?
No, I plan to research this gallery, but
in the future.
Yes, I'm still like seeing how to approach it.
Okay, I'm sure we will talk again very soon.
Yes, very nice to meet you guys.
Yes, nice.
It was also very nice to see you. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing this with us.
And we will talk again.
Okay, well, see you and take care.
And you too.